All right. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining in. I see a few of them have joined in and a few more are expected. Really appreciate the time taken on a Monday evening. I know a lot of follow-ups, catch-ups are ought to be done. So let me quickly get started and I'm going to share my screen. If you could confirm it is visible. Okay, thank you so much. So before I get started, a very warm evening and welcome to this conversation which we are going to discuss today, typically from SEBI cybersecurity framework per se. To bring it to context and to remind everybody, SEBI came up with this cybersecurity framework a year before August 2024. That was when it came up with. And there have been several requirements, timelines, and deadlines. Of course, they've given some relaxation as well. So we will try to address them and also try to refresh the memory for most of you in terms of what the requirements are and what these regulations practically speak of. So before we get going, I just want to quickly talk about what exactly In.Corp is. In.Corp is an Ascentium company, Singapore headquartered. We have presence in multiple places across the geography, 20 plus countries, and predominantly in India. Mumbai, Bangalore, GIFT City are our major operations. And of course, we have colleagues working in close to about 10 to 15 different other locations. We are a business services company, predominantly focusing on a range of services starting from accounting, maybe risk, cyber, technology consulting, virtual CFO, to the newer areas like ESG practice, to domains like the initial people we talk about IPO, funding, debt syndication. So these are all fairly a large spectrum of services which we are dealing with. So this particular session or a webinar is predominantly to focus or give you perspective of how you should adopt to the SEBI's cybersecurity framework, considering the fact that there are less than about 20 days, if I could probably use the verbatim way, there are less than about 20 days for you to execute and get started. So the way we will do it is we will give you some perspective on the cybersecurity guidelines which SEBI has come up with. Of course, there are a few other webinars where we have spoken in depth, so I'm not going to do that. And then I'll leave the floor open for certain questions where I request you in the Q&A window, please go ahead and post your questions, and then we will try to take it up as and when it comes along. So that's basically the objective and context of this conversation. So just to give you some background and refresh your memory, this is the first comprehensive guideline which has come up from SEBI, which governs almost all the regulated entities. Right? Why I'm using the word almost is there are a small set of players where exemptions have been given, but literally it is everybody. And the objective is to strengthen cybersecurity and enhance the resilience. Okay. Now, many times people think that, okay, if a regulation comes, we'll take it as it comes through, or we'll look into as and when it gets along, etc. While that approach is not very appreciated, we have noticed that regulators are also of late asking so many questions. Recently, I'm not sure how many of them are aware, the CERT, came up with one comprehensive set of guidelines which talks about how organizations have to be subject to audit, what are the different types of audit, and what are the expectations from auditors. Right. So this is something which is very interesting because a regulator coming forward and saying, hey, of course, it's not a pure play regulator. Of course, it has powers under the Information Technology Act. It is basically stating that, hey, you ought to make a mention or you ought to make sure that you are having these approaches and guidelines in the perspective. And also, I'll give you another perspective. Recently, one of the regulated entity where an observation was issued, immediately, we all think we take it for granted, right? Backup not being done, or certain basic things not being done, etc. Where a regulator says that you'll have to do it and it is not being done, right? Those are being taken seriously by the organization or seriously by the entity. So regulators, and therefore they've also started imposing fines and penalties. It could be, ROC trying to impose questions on your backup is not there in India, or your audit trail not being enabled. So many things like this are coming up in these days. So it makes sense that we understand these requirements, and that's where the entire talking point is. So CSCRF is broadly having two domains. One is the resilience, one more is the cybersecurity. Cyber security you will find in the third layer, which is built under probably 4+2 pillars, right? Totally 6 pillars. Whereas cyber resilience goals you will find it in the first two columns, which are 5, which is evolve, anticipate, withstand, contain, and recover. Basically, the focus is they have taken a benchmark from the NIST framework, and they've said that you have to define certain things from a strategy perspective, how you have to go ahead. That's basically the use case. Okay. Now, what we will do is I'll just give you a couple of slides on the applicability, and then I'll pause to take questions. And again, I have few more slides depending on time and how you have questions. We will try to keep that going. So the first thing which I want to give a heads up is the applicability. If you see from an applicability standpoint, literally every registered entity under these guidelines, this is applicable, right? When I use the word literally everybody, I'm talking from AIF, clearing corporation, collective investment schemes, depositories, debenture trustees, right? You can talk about venture capital fund, stock exchange, right? All of these entities, this is applicable. That doesn't mean that this is applicable for all listed companies. There are about 500 to 500 plus listed companies. So is this applicable for them? It is applicable for a listed company only if they fall under this criteria. An example is HDFC Asset Management Company. Again, I'm just taking names for examples. They are a listed company, right? So when you have a HDFC Asset Management Company, which is a listed company, no doubt SEBI listing obligation requirements come into picture. In addition to this, you also have the cybersecurity guidelines, which is issued by SEBI recently. That is also applicable because they are a registered entity covered in this particular slide, right? So they were typically called as asset management company. So likewise, your mutual fund, all of these players are typically applicable. Then comes the question, for whom is it not applicable? So if you say from whom it is not applicable, well, of course, there are a smaller set of players. Like, if you're having less than 5 clients, 100 clients, they've given some classification. We'll come to that. But what is very interesting is you might always say, hey, this is too much for us to comply because SEBI is expecting us to have too many things. And my fear is that we might have very little time or, resources to comply. And that is where this is a very interesting thing. They've come up with a graded approach. The graded approach, what they've done is they've said 5 grades. The topmost grade is the MII, Market Institution, Infrastructure Institutions. And by the way, this webinar, it does not make sense for these stakeholders because they're already compliant. For them, the cutoff was January 1st with a slight relaxation given until March 31st. So for them, they had to be compliant. Then came these larger buckets of qualified RE, mid-size RE, small size RE, and self-certification RE, right? So for these 4 of them, you will notice that there are a bunch of requirements. Now you would obviously question, hey, in the previous slide, you said these are the registered entities. In this slide, you're saying they are categorized as 5. What is this all about, right? So in simple language, understand this to be a small matrix, 5 categories on top, different registration entities on the x-axis or y-axis, however you can put it. For each of them, there is a threshold defined. For example, if you are a qualified RE, right, under an AIF, you need to have a minimum AUM size, right? Or if you're a custodian, you need to have certain asset under management, right? Or custody, asset under custody. So like this, there are different thresholds which are being defined. And that's the basis on which this entire framework is set up, right? What is very, very important is last month, when I say last month, June 30th, let's put it that way, because June 30th was the cutoff date for implementation. 2 or 3 days before, they came up with a circular where they've given a 2-month relaxation until August 31st. So August 31st is the extended compliance timeline for all registered entities. Of course, as I said, MIA, this is not applicable, and few large players, this is not applicable because for them, March 31st was the revised cutoff date. Why do I say revised cutoff date? Because they were given certain regulatory forbearance as long as they were able to showcase that they are implementing. Okay, so the MIS, QRTs, from January 1st. This is basically what the major thing which you have to keep in mind, right? Now, I'll speak about what are the key requirements and then I'll pause for questions. And if there is some additional requirement, I will definitely bring up some slides to explain. So what is it that is required? First, from a governance framework, they expect a framework to be developed for cybersecurity. Now, don't think that this framework is just a policy document. I will go to ChatGPT and get it done. It is not so easy, frankly being said, right? Because I know people who have tried this and they have come back to us saying, no, it's better that, we spend some money for professional advice because this is going nowhere. Second is very important, defining roles and responsibilities and authorities, especially certain key definitions are necessary. There are certain state companies or categories where they mandatorily require a CISO or a designated person to act as a CISO, right? Just smaller companies, especially QRE and MII require this. The other categories you have designated a person as an in charge, that is sufficient. You have to develop a risk management strategy. This should not only identify assets, you should also monitor. That means this monitoring, you cannot say once a year I will monitor. It does not make sense because the risk is higher. It should be periodical updates, including monthly, quarterly updates, etc. So that is crucial. Third, you need to define your critical assets. Now, critical assets are where a majority of your transactions data is actually being held. For example, if you're a stockbroker, majority volume is going through that particular platform, right? Whatever you have developed. It's another matter. You might be using a SaaS subscription or a SaaS solution. You will have to make sure even that is being subject to. So critical systems, define and make sure the assets are managed adequately. Then you look into identity management and authentication. So are you able to identify how are you defining the login ID credentials, the multi-factor authentications, password, access privileges, all of those have to be looked into, right? And then comes from a data security and protection. Initially, the regulation said that all data should be within India, right? Then they came up with a relaxation. All the regulated data, this is where your KYC, all of those things, those have to be in India. Rest of them, there is some bit of a flexibility in case it is elsewhere as well. So those are typically the first set of requirements. The second set of requirements is something called as a SOC. Now the SOC is applicable where you will have to set up, right? And what is a SOC in layman's language? 24/7 monitoring of your infrastructure and ecosystem. That is a security operations center. So this security operations center should be set up by MII, qualified RE, whatever you get, for these two fellows, typically, right? Others, you can go for an MSOC, no problem on that. And this MSOC, for certain categories of companies, they have given the exemption, but otherwise, this is predominantly applicable for all of them. Next is also you need to do a mandatory vulnerability assessment and a penetration testing performed by a certain entity only. And this should include critical assets, applications, all of those things. Then there's also requirement for a cyber audit. And this is mandatory for all of them. Only for MIA and QRE, there is twice a year. Rest of them, it's once a year, right? You need to develop an incident management procedure. So if case there are issues, certain things are going haywire, you need to have a mechanism to report that. And last but not the least, you need to have an awareness and training sessions, right? So these are typically what are the scenarios. So given this, I think I will pause over here. I will pick up a few questions, right? And let me see, I see some questions coming up. I know there is a question relating to relaxation. I'll speak about that as well. So one of the question is, we would like to know what reporting is applicable for self-certified RE regarding CSCRF. If yes, through which portal to submit. Saji, as of now, they have not enabled the feature for submission of reports. It is expected by September because typically the first milestone of half-yearly reporting is applicable then for larger players. For smaller players, especially if you are a self-certified RE, this I'm expecting to be made available by the next year. Just like yearly you submit compliance report, the same section you'll have to log in to that place and you'll have to submit it. Hopefully that gives you that clarification. Okay, so let's quickly see if any other questions have come up. Give me a minute. Okay. One of the question which has, okay, I can see two more questions coming up. Okay, what are critical systems? If we are into advisory, No critical data is stored. Okay, that's an interesting point. So the way I would look into it, critical system definition is explicitly not given. The way I would probably see it is, if you have any system slash application which is the basis for which to take any decision, or as a matter of fact to decide yes or no, which will break or make or break the entire ecosystem, I would say that would typically be the basis for you to get hooked, right? So my suggestion would be, it could be for all you know, even a SharePoint application where you have hosted some data. It could, for all you know, be a place where you are just sharing some information. I would leave that to you, but that's the predominant basis on which you get started. I know you're into advisory, maybe you're into research, etc. The place where you host all of these. It could be your in-house server, etc. So just perform a simple vulnerability penetration testing so that you're very clear that the risks are being taken care. In fact, some cases for clients we have advised at least do a VAPT on your network firewall so that it is making sure that there is no perpetrator who comes and has a look into your things. Okay. One other question which I get at this point in time is, I understand there are some changes which has happened in the categorization. Can you give us some details about that, right? So I'll give you a summary of some of these changes. I have a small spreadsheet document. Maybe you can also, I'll see if I can bring that up in the interest of, ease. Yes, I think I've found this. So I'm sharing my spreadsheet document where you'll be able to see this, right? So let me put it in a very, very simple language. If you are a fund, AIF, right? The major relaxation has come for AIF. Earlier, AIF more than 3,000 crores was called as a qualified RE, right? Now, this is very, very interesting. The AIF today can no longer be a qualified RE. It has to be a mid-size, small size, or self-certified only. This is because most of these AIFs are based out of fund, and these are calculated based on NAV market value, whereas in reality, they would have collected little, that value would have grown high, right? And implementation, all of them, and most of these funds are managed with some 20 people, 30 people, etc. So it does not make so much of sense. So they revised the categorization of AIF less than 3,000 crores. I repeat, less than 3,000 crores. In fact, the earlier limit was less than 100 crores. So less than 100 crores now became less than 3,000 crores. That's a fairly large volume of exemption which they've given, right? Next is small size RE, 3,000 crores and above, but less than 10,000 crores. And mid size RE, 10,000 crores and above. So this is typically the applicability. Based on applicability, the requirements also change. The same information would also be applicable for portfolio manager and venture capital fund, right? So if I have to probably highlight it for the ease of reference, I'm just highlighting it in amber, right? So these players whom you see I'm highlighting in amber, typically for these guys, the more or less the same set of requirements have come. Of course, for portfolio managers, they've said only two things: less than 3,000 and more than 3,000, right? So if it's less than 3,000, you come under self. If you have more than 3,000, you come under the mid size, right? So those are a few things. Now, the few other things where they have given for investment advisors, research analysts, because generally investment advisor, research analyst also have other license. So you go based on the other license. Maybe they have a AIF license, they have a broker license, they have a PMS license, etc. For a depository participant also they have clarified, where they have said more than 1,000 up to 10,000 clients, or value wise also more than 1,000 and up to 10,000 crores in terms of value. So in those cases, your depository participants have given some amount of additional requirement. So these are two major changes. Others are very cosmetic, which you will notice. Again, for stockbrokers as well. So typically they have enhanced the limit for these stakeholders. So many of them who were earlier qualified RE have also come under the small RE bucket or a self-certification RE bucket. So that's the major change which you will notice between the old regulations and the new regulations, right? And this is effective from April 30th is when they have done the categorization. So does it mean for 30 days I need to adhere? The answer is no, because your applicability date is effectively When? August 1st, September 1st, because August 31st is the cutoff date for you to make sure you're adhering to it. All right. Reporting format for self-certification RE for self-declaration means it is not applicable for you now. Saji, it is not applicable for you immediately. You will be submitting your first declaration next year, right? So that is something which you should be aware, because your regulations are applicable from 1st of September, or you have to make sure you're compliant by August 31st. So your compliance report on a self-certification basis from 1st of September till 31st of March 26, you will be submitting, and you will have to submit that when? Only once the portal or these things are enabled, right? So you can definitely check that. It's not that you will have to deploy it right now. What are critical systems? Example, if you're into advisory, I think I did make a mention of this, so I've clarified that. Hi, if a team uses CRM SaaS product, would we cover that system under MSOC and VAPT? Could you throw some light on merchant banker category? Okay, fair enough. Now, for a merchant banker, typically what happens is they follow or they fall under the, let me quickly bring up that, because they are based on issue management, right? So today, if the it is typically if the merchant banker is involved in a issue management, then they call under mid-size. All other fellows come under small size. These are two categorizations. So there is no other mechanism. They cannot be a self-certification RE, right? A merchant banker has to be a small size RE. So when you are a small size and above, audit is mandatory, first thing. Second, if a team uses a CRM SaaS product, do we have to cover that system? Okay. Now, first and foremost is that CRM subject to some sort of a due diligence, vendor verification, or a third-party risk management? That's the first question you need to ask. Generally, they will have a SOC 2 report. In that SOC 2 report, they will clearly mention what they have done, what they have not done. So that should give you a reasonable number of clarity. And do you have to cover that into the system? If that is your critical information, your database, that's where you have all the key message and the data, I think you may have to cover that. So that is something which I thought I should clarify as well. Okay. Any other questions which we may probably want to pick up? I'm happy to answer them. I understand we have about close to about 30 participants. Also bring up some quick information, typically what is necessary and what is not necessary, how do we get going, etc. So your scoping depends on your requirements, starting from your gap assessment to implementation assistance to your policy reviews, etc. So each of them have different pillars and buckets based on which this is necessary. Some you have to have a IT committee, some you require a periodical training, some this is not applicable. Cyber audits are twice a year for some category, they are once a year for rest of them. For some people, cyber audits are not even necessary, but you just have to do a voluntary commitment, compliance, etc. So that is also something which you should be aware of. This is an illustrative case when we spoke of how this happens. So for example, if it is a fund qualified RE where it comes under, etc. So I did clarify that these relaxations have changed, right, for some people whom I made a mention. But yes, if you're looking into a mutual fund or an asset management company, predominantly this categorization continues to be as it is. Okay. What if we are not ready with MSOC by 31st August, anonymous attendee, my dear friend, you will be non-compliant, as simple as that. So you could go ahead and say that, when you're doing the self-certification, assuming you are under that category, that you are non-compliant from this date to this date, you have deployed it from this date. That is one method. Second method, if you are subject to an audit, the auditor will say, from this date, you are non-compliant. For the rest of the period, you have been compliant, provided you have fixed it. If you have not fixed it, then it becomes non-compliance. Then obviously SEBI can take action, penalty, any punitive measure, etc. So my suggestion is MSOC onboarding typically takes about 2 to 3 days, the best case scenario. Slightly more complex, it takes about a couple of weeks. So please go ahead and initiate. As of now, there are some notified parties, so I think you should go ahead and speak to them and get this going. Okay, good question. How about individual research analyst who is not that aggressive? So the law does not say who is aggressive and not aggressive, but rather they say if you are an individual research analyst, this is not applicable for you because the exemption is giving you benefit of that. If you are an individual research analyst, if you are a company, then yes, for you it will be applicable. So hopefully it will give you some clarity there. If you're typically a research analyst, and I'm presuming you have that registration under that research, right? You can double check once. I think the research category, they have given that exemption. How do we scope systems if the company is registered for multiple RE and highest category is small RE? You're right. So under each of them, you independently identify which you fall under. If you're saying all of them put together, your highest categorization is small RE. Whatever is applicable for small RE will be applicable throughout the ecosystem, right? It's not just for one, it will be applicable throughout the ecosystem. So this is one challenge you will find, but I think that's how people eventually will have to be compliant. So the same set of requirements would be applicable for all. So which would mean you may also have to have a cyber audit, even though you may have another registration which comes under your self-certification. Okay. One other question which most of them have, and people ask me saying, how are you going about this? Where do we stand? How do we get started, etc. So most of the time, my approach has been fairly simple. We spend some time to do requirement identification, understand what is your organization setup, etc. What part of the CSCRF regulations is applicable for you. Do that bit of a matching, and then give you a typical gap assessment report. And once people are reasonably clear, okay, this is my gap, this is what I have, this is what I don't have, etc. Focus on developing the policy. Then of course, implement and monitoring comes into picture. Last is there might be situations where you may have to do certification, reporting, get some sort of external stakeholders to comply with certain things. So that's typically how the entire journey will get going. So that's your implementation role. All right. This is going more into the governance related elements. For example, what do you have to do from a governance? You need to have a cybersecurity policy. Make sure that you have defined all the risk, what is applicable in your organization. It should be customized, not ChatGPT driven. Please note that. Define the cybersecurity roles and responsibilities. Ensure there's a layer of oversight, continuous improvisation. There might be requirements of a third party cybersecurity risk management, especially some of you message that you're using SaaS solutions, etc. So this becomes all the more necessary. And you also have to establish an IT committee. This is typically applicable for the largest of the two. All right. So I think I've answered that question as well. By the way, there's a very nice FAQ document itself which SEBI has published. It's a worthy document for you to spend some time in case you have. Like for example, is a CISO is mandatory, right? Can I have a virtual CISO, right? So they say that virtual CISO is okay, provided the personnel is only dedicated to one specific organization, right? So little tricky. So technically they say you need to have a dedicated CISO. Can the group CISO also be the CISO here? Yes, it is possible. If you have a group entity, group CISO can act as the CISO. Where can you find FAQs? It's available in the SEBI website and the CSCRF. You can go and search it. Otherwise, you write to us. We'll see if we can send this across to you. But you just have to go and search FAQs on CSCRF by SEBI. They will give you this, or you'll be able to identify. Okay. I see some other questions coming in. We have just started a business. Client onboarding is going on. On this case, VAPT is applicable for you. Saji, please check whether you have what is the nature of business is the first question which I would want you to look into. And then you have applications which are externally world facing. If the answer is yes, my suggestion is to get a VAPT done. If you're using SaaS solutions, make sure that you are relying upon the SaaS service provider's VAPT. In fact, as we speak, one of the points in the FAQ, I'm just recollecting, where they've also given a clear explanation as to what exactly is the meaning of critical systems. So they have said that it is left up to the registered entity how you define it. Just to clarify, that is also one point which is the thing. Okay, so for PMS, I think you can go get started with onboarding. I think there is a relaxation which is there for PMS for MSOC, not for VAPT. So VAPT will still be mandatory. And by the way, this BSc and NSC have set up what is called as a market SOC, MSOC. You can go and search in their website. They will also help you to, monitor on an ongoing basis. The next question, whether any automated tool for CC and SOC efficiency is mandatory? Good question, Sunil Karanth. This is mandatory only for qualified RE and MIA, right? The efficacy of all of these has to be done for because the CII by the way is Cyber Capability Index. This is mandatory only for MII and qualified RE CII. I repeat, Cyber Capability Index is mandatory only for two people. Who are those two people? It is qualified RE, market infra institution. For the market infra institution, they have an audit requirement of that. Whereas for QRE, there's no audit requirement. It's purely on self-certification basis, etc. Now, SOC efficacy is applicable for your qualified RE as well as your MII, right? So that's basically where the requirement is. This you will have to adhere to it. Whether an automated tool can be used for that, you can use that, but they have given the scoring mechanism as to how you should focus on defining the efficacy. All right. Yeah, you can use that. Excel is sufficient. But the parameters based on which you are tracking, that is very important. In fact, if you read the guideline, there is something where it clearly talks about the efficacy. How do you track the efficacy and things like that. Just to give you, they have given an annexure in. I'm just opening the guideline because you asked this question. There is something called technology coverage of assets. What are the SOC operations? What is the competency of the people? Do they have a governance layer? Enrichment and enhancement. So all of these things typically comes into the coverage here actually. And while we speak about this, they have given a bifurcation as to how you should be calculating this as well. Excel sheet is more than sufficient as long as you have verifiable information which you have pushed into the Excel sheet. When do you have to report to SEBI, and is there any report apart from audit report to be submitted to certain? As I said, it depends on your categorization. So if you recollect, I made a mention over here, different scenarios. Your two reports which you will have to obviously submit is your VAPT report as well as your audit report. Audit report is mandatory. VAPT in case you have any observations and findings. And by the way, for the first time, they have also given the VAPT report format. So earlier we didn't have that this is the way we have to submit, but now they've clearly given the tools approach. This is going to bring a lot of standardization and similarity. It's another matter. Some people will just go ahead and copy paste or whatever you can call it. But this is a starting point. Let's see how well it is able to go ahead. All right. Next question is again coming from the FAQ. Do I have to monitor the database? Interesting. So when you say database, I'm presuming you're referring to the backend, and this is where tools like SOC become very important. Your objective of deploying the SOC is also to monitor the backend, so that if somebody goes and makes changes in the backend, automatically updates is going to the MSOC player, and they will give you an alert saying somebody has attempted to access this. How do we rely on threat intelligence? Good question. Good question. Right? So we do not have any specific threat intelligence defined, right? You have the NCIIPC, then you have certain, they gives you some amount of threat intelligence which you can subscribe to. There are also some other industry specific solutions and external commercial vendors. You can probably subscribe to that. The reason is because, especially for the top two, these become very mandatory. For training, do we have any specific topics? Nothing specifically given saying this is what you need to cover. But my logical presumption would be that it should cover the basic things as to what are necessary, what is the attack vectors, what are the nuances you're getting into. I think that should be a good enough mechanism to get started. In fact, if you are a first and second category, which is MII or qualified RE, you have a metrics within the CCI, cyber, what is that, capability index, which talks about training parameters, right? At least every once a year training has to be done. It is considering all the basic requirements, all of those things. So that is a good way for you to cross refer it as well. All right. Data localization, I think I've answered that questions. I think that's fine. Again, there are some repeat questions, so I'm trying to avoid that. So I hope you appreciate that. Okay. Now, what is the role of forensic auditors? Right? Now, forensic auditor would come into picture if there is a requirement for you to investigate into the technology elements or a potential fraud is taken place. In those cases, this is necessary. So RE shall engage third-party auditors for forensic. They need not be certain and parent. Okay, because this certain is not a forensic auditor based criteria. This is just for you to be aware of it. Just curious, are there any other questions which one basic question which many of them ask, is it mandatory to encrypt any data? The answer is obviously yes. Whatever method you're using on-premise, you're using SaaS, really doesn't matter. Encryption is a basic cybersecurity hygiene practice. Think are we permitted to outsource activities? Yes, you are permitted to outsource activities, but again, remember, you would be held responsible for their mistakes. So make sure that there are very clear, stringent guidelines. Explain a DR implementation in brief. My goodness, it's a fairly long question, but let me put it into simpler manner. You need to showcase or you need to have a system where in the event a disaster occurs, how are you able to recover? As simple as you losing your laptop or you losing out your data or some attacker coming in and taking away the information. So what is the next course of action? So obviously you demonstrate with the help of backup. You periodically test this backup. and you assume a breach scenario where if there is a breach, what all you will do? You will do a DR drill. So that's called as a DR drill. So that is something which is recommended for you to perform. Okay, quickly going into this one very interesting thing. There is something called as a SBOM. Okay, not sure how many of them have come across this software bill of material, right? Now, in simplest language, if you ask me, my dear friends, it is the list of all the requirements or components which are necessary for building that software. Like how you have, if I have to manufacture a car, component wise, what all is necessary. Similarly, from a software perspective, what are all the things which are necessary, right? While doing this, why I'm giving this is because many a times what happens, many people use some open source solutions, bring them together, combine and deliver the product. Now you should have that visibility of that software bill of materials. That's what the standard or the requirement is. Okay, it's a very unique requirement, but I still like it because of, standardization. What if that fellow runs out of business? You at least have some reference point. I think I have answered most of the other questions which are coming up. India region, I said yes. Uh, you need to make sure that it is as much as possible. The regulated data is within India. The non-regulated data can be outside. Hmm. How would you report it to the SEBI? I think this is something which some of them asked. As I said, there is a threshold, submission limit. All of these things are given within the cybersecurity framework itself. You can probably pick up from there. So typically, if you see, there is an annexure also which they talk about it. If you're a broker, you submit it to stock exchange. If you're an investment advisor, right? If you're a MII or anybody else, so they've given threshold to whom do you report it and make it. Do small RE have to submit any declared reportation on August 31st? No. Small RE for you audit will be done next year, but make sure you have evidence to showcase you are compliant from September 1st. Otherwise, it is too dangerous. For self-certified, सब सब आपका इच्छा है, right? So just be cautious. I think I've answered a good number of questions. Okay, I still see it coming. All right. As a merchant banker, categorized under mid-size, so which means you are doing into issue management. VAPT report dated 20th June and cyber audit report dated 20th August 24 to 31st March have been submitted on 21 June 25 to SEBI. Quarterly report on incident nil for the quarter has been submitted. Is there any other compliance within 30th August 2025? Okay. As is my very basic question to you is you are submitting all of these under the erstwhile guidelines. Now, my question to you is, are you adhering to the entire CSCRF guidelines? For example, if you're a mid-size RE, let us say there is a requirement for you to develop an IT committee example, right? So this IT committee requirement came up only now. It was not there in the 2024, whatever equivalent guidelines are. So which would still mean that you have to do that bit of initial assessment. So my sense, Asis Mukhopadhyay, thanks for asking this question. My request would be, please kindly go ahead and make sure that the requirements of the August 24 framework you are met with. If you have already met it, great. But generally, when these people have issued the report or attestation, it is based on the previous historical period. Okay. Do you know what is the cost of MSOC? I'm sorry, I will not be able to help you there. But generally, my understanding based on what we have had a discussion, it works about per month, per device, they have some pricing. And I think you'll have to negotiate with them to give you that sort of a bulk pricing. Okay, I think we have covered FAQs, we have covered the extension. I'm just curious as to what more do we have. The whole objective is that you should be ready to get started with the implementation journey. And then you'll realize certain things are missing. As you get along, you should be able to get that. Okay, one other question. So we'll probably take maximum 2 or 3 more questions in the interest of time. Correct me if I'm wrong. For small RE policy, MSOC, VAPT audit. It's a crude way of saying it, but yes, those are essential at least for you to get started. I don't know who that anonymous attendee is, but I think if it is the same person, I've almost answered the entire CSCRF for you. But it's okay. We are happy that we are able to bring in that perspective to you. Okay, so I have 2 or 3 more slides. I'll probably complete that. So typically what challenges which we are noticing within our clients is understanding this requirement, seeing that grading itself is one big challenge. Then second, as most of you acknowledged, setting up MSOC, a good amount of risk, money, time. Third, are you able to interpret the applicability of these regulations where it is necessary, where it is not necessary? So there you will find a little bit of a challenge. Some security controls, I think it's still manageable. VAPT, we spoke about what is the scope of VAPT, for whom you should do, from whom you should not do. And last but not the least, the supply chain, because you are also dealing with vendors. Okay. Remember, vendors, or if they're compliant, only then you can be compliant. So it goes into one level to them as well. So they will also, even though for them it is CSCRF is not directly applicable, you will still have to make sure that they are adhering to this. So what are the typical one-time versus periodical? So periodical, you have various things like VAPT, SOC, cyber audit, etc. Whereas one-time is typically this year, your gap assessment, policies, implementation, setting up SOC, etc. That's a typical one time. Then comes your periodicity or vertical, which keeps on triggering. So how do we get started? As I said, help us understand with your categorization. Then we typically perform a readiness assessment. Once that is done, we implement controls. And of course, we periodically keep on monitoring the entire ecosystem where you are heading into, what is missing out. And this should ideally take it. I know SEBI might find it, you might find it a little overwhelming this year to complete so many things, but it's a necessary in terms of compliance. You should go ahead and take that. It would take some amount of time. So that is where we are helping there to help you out. We're doing a typical readiness exercise. And once that readiness exercise is done, we also help in implementation. And then we do the periodical monitoring, right? So depending on what you want to pick and choose from us, your menu card, happy that you can pick and choose any of these, and we would be happy to help you out there. So yes, if there are no more questions, thank you so much for being a lovely audience. I'm happy that you had some questions I was able to answer. Feel free to reach out. Our email ID is in info@incorpadvisory.in. The objective of this is A, obviously to give you some awareness, and B is, where you have requirements, we can reach out to you in person and see how well we can help you address some of these questions and queries. Okay. On that note, if there is no more questions, I will probably give about 4 to 5 minutes. Otherwise, we can wrap up this conversation. I think I've also shared most of this information with you. You should be in a position to drive some value out of it. Okay, I have answered. I've got about 30 odd questions. So it was fairly good.
Also, Nara, I would like to add that everyone will be getting the recording of this webinar on their email,
Lovely.
and they can also follow us on LinkedIn for our upcoming webinars.
Sure. Thanks, Dolly, for bringing in that. So please make sure, in case you have any questions, you can reach out to us. And at the same time, this recording, as Dolly said, we will be sharing it across to you as well. Okay, on that note, I think we can. Okay, I see one question coming just before when we wrap up. Okay, it's just a thank you note. Thank you then. All right. Thank you so much, folks. It was lovely conversation. Hoping it was a good value addition for all of you. Take care. We'll catch up sometime soon. All the best.